In this episode, I'd like to talk about what my thought process was for the design of my rental units. I have already built a small house. I built it small intentionally, knowing that it would be a learning process, and I didn't want to learn on something that was going to be big and expensive. So some of the things that I've learned I would like to share with you today. A small rotten fish. Now I'm just going to eat it.
And you make it your own way.
I'm taking the information I learned from building the house and kind of revamped my thought process. Some of the old thoughts that I had about earthquakes, typhoons, durability, cost of making, a lot of those things, those still apply, and I'll touch base on those as well. Here the first two units will be, and I'd like to talk why I went with standalone units, and that is because they will provide more rent, more privacy. I don't have to have a firewall through the roof that might leak water. They have individual parking, and I could sell them off individually if I wanted to. There are some cons, and that would be that it will cost me an additional wall and 8 feet of roof per unit, and I can only fit 3 units instead of 4 on the front half of the property. The first thing I needed to do was choose a building material. My choices were concrete or wood, and concrete won hands down, except in the area of earthquakes. Wood is obviously better in earthquakes, but I built my house with a technique called confined masonry, and I intend to do that with these rental units as well. You see a lot of houses here in the Philippines that have left their finish as just the concrete hollow block, and I think I know why now. When I decided to finish my house and make all the walls smooth, my 6-inch hollow block walls turned into 9 inches thick, and that's because I had 1.5 inches of mortar on, or rendering finish, I'm not sure what you would call it, on each side of my wall. And that 1.5 inches of rendering was mixed at a ratio of 2.5 to 1. A friend of mine tore down a wall in his house, and all the hollow block went away, and the mortar in between the holes of the hollow block stayed with the mortar they filled it with. This isn't his, but there became a lot of hidden expense to finishing the house. The strongest part of concrete, in my opinion, is the gravel. And by making hollow blocks, you leave that part out. And instead, you put in more cement to make it stronger, which is the most expensive part. So the idea of building with hollow blocks is they get rid of the strongest part and replace it with the most expensive part. Alright, so I just bought a hollow block so that I could illustrate the quality. One that I made. Poured concrete or concrete hollow block. This was a hard decision to make, and everyone I talked to thinks that I made the wrong decision. Overall, the conclusion, as well as each of the topics, was very debatable, but instead of wasting your time talking about it, just pause the video if you're interested in reading some things to consider. The biggest benefit being that I can inspect before the second form is put in place and the concrete is poured instead of having to be present for every block placement. Why I have chosen to build it solid concrete instead of hollow block. you can see that even when the block was around this, that rebar wasn't doing a whole lot, not being fully encased in the mortar. And this is a standard building technique here in the Philippines. Maybe you will understand now why I've chosen to go solid concrete. It's been raining for about 3 days now. I got online last night, and there's a tropical storm a few hundred miles off the coast. There's a few factors you should consider when choosing a roof. You can go ahead and pause these next few screens if you would like to read it, but here are some points that you might not be aware of, and that is that the higher the peaks, that will allow the hot air to be pulled away from the ceiling, providing more comfort. Low roof pitch will allow the rain to essentially blow uphill through the seams of the roofing sheets, which will cause leaks inside, and big overhangs allow more shade on your walls, increasing your comfort. I was very happy the way the tile was cut for the drain. I was not very happy how the wall receptacles turned out. And as far as a different style door finish goes, probably nobody would ever notice. The windows were not square or straight, and I didn't even notice this until it was time to make the screens. You may have missed where the screen was cut and made a sharp edge, so I will point it out. Windows and doors, according to the confined masonry guidelines, should not be within 3 feet of an adjacent wall and no longer than half the length of the wall. So in choosing a window and door layout, if you want the most strength, small windows. If you want the most ventilation, big windows. And if you want the most privacy, no windows. Or doors, for that matter. This is the middle unit floor plan with a unit on each side. The front door is on the bottom, the back door is on the top. Windows are marked in red, privacy walls marked in black, and the yards for each of these units are purple and blue. On a side note, the bathroom will be 4 inches lower than the rest of the house. We put a tarp up with scaffolding over his 10-foot deep hole so to keep him out of the sun. At least when he first started, he was in the sun. I suppose the deeper the hole gets, the less in the sun you are. On my tiny little house, I spent almost 100,000 pesos, that's $2,000, on coconut lumber. My friend's doing his house with bamboo scaffolding. What are your thoughts on scaffolding?
It's expensive. Scaffolding? It's crazy expensive.
And you did yours out of bamboo.
First I did mine out of coconut lumber, and then we spent about $200,000 on coconut lumber, and then so I, not wanting to buy more and more coconut lumber, I started getting some of this bamboo and saving a ton of money. About maybe 5,000 pesos of bamboo, maybe 40 stalks, 40 or 50 stalks of bamboo, and maybe about 3,000 pesos of conveyor belt, the ones they wrap it with. And if I ever have a big project, I'm going to do it all in
Bamboo.
all bamboo, yeah.
So they all assured me that, oh, you can use this again and you can... That stuff was garbage 4 months later. And I'm thinking, why didn't they tell me about that before I started? I would have much rather spent 30,000 instead of 90,000. That's pesos. 90,000 is $1,800 though. $1,800 on lumber for a concrete house.
Price is probably about 5 to 1, probably 5 times cheaper
For bamboo.
for bamboo. But everything else, like all the scaffolding, should be, if you want to do the cheapest way, would probably be bamboo.
Yeah.
I really don't know. There's also the metal option. What's the metal poles?
The GI pipe.
GI pipe, yeah.
Yeah.
You got some of that, right?
Well, that's what I'm using. And I've been to a few construction sites where I've seen that they're using that. And those seem to be done by the companies that this is their business. They're doing it over and over. So I think that they're probably the cheapest if you're going to use them over and over.
Yeah, of course.
Bamboo scaffolding is the cheapest, but for doing multiple units and especially for holding the concrete forms in place, I needed steel pipe. Everything worked just fine. What else should we touch base on? I was the most happy with the roof because I put all the electrical outlets, I screwed them to the forms before we poured the concrete, and then before we removed the forms, I just unscrewed them, pulled off the forms, and they all look perfect. So when we pulled all that down, and they're saying, oh, you still need 100 bags for the walls, I'm going, well, why didn't you just do the walls the way we did the roof? The roof doesn't need anything. I put a plug up here. This is the ceiling. And a junction box. And you can see how good and flush those look. Here's another one. Pretty much ready to just have the top put on it. And as far as the outlet goes, it was ready. I just screwed a outlet on it. Even though mine didn't turn out so well, my friend's turned out perfectly by cutting the wall during the finish process. Oh my gosh. So, I chose to do metal forms, but if I were intending on doing any less than 5 units, this would have been a more difficult choice. So that's why I'm building this way now. Hopefully, I won't spend as much finishing these as everybody else does. I'm not using that one. This? What is this?
Love, 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 baby, this is that.